Hello and welcome to the Brubacher and Beyond podcast, where we are shaping the world we live in so more people can find the construction industry uncommonly refreshing. Today we have a special guest, Representative Dave Zimmerman, with us today. And this really was a reach out to Representative Zimmerman's office to say, thank you for everything you do for us. We really appreciate your representation for us. There have been many times that I know our office or my office has called and asked your office for questions or contacts, and they always respond back promptly and give us the time that we need as a business to keep moving forward. With the employees or team members at Brubacher that we have, one of my tasks is to keep finding new opportunities so we can keep working. We believe as long as our team members are working, we will keep on moving in the right direction as a company. But if we think of our team members first and keeping them with steady income, it really helps out a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of things that we will discuss here today for some topics. But the first one I usually ask everybody is, who is David Zimmerman? And give us a little bit of insight from you and your family. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, well, thanks, Chris. So good to be here with you, and always appreciated Brubacher, and of course I know Ben and Keith, and just individuals, as you say, are trying to do the best they can for the people that they're doing work for, and keeping employees working and making livelihoods right here at Brubacher. So it's certainly good to be here. So I am Dave Zimmerman, a state rep for the 99th District, which is kind of northeast Lancaster County and southern Berks County, and certainly a lot of similarities throughout the district. I grew up on a dairy farm right in the district, worked in agriculture industry for a number of years, served in sales and service management for a number of years. So also got involved in hiring and placing and training and all of that of people in a number of states, actually. And so 10 years ago, I was elected as a state representative and, been in Harrisburg since that. And even in that 10 years, Chris, things have changed and look different than they did just 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I looked through some of the bills that you have sponsored and co-sponsored, and it's just amazing that there's a lot of work, and even I don't even understand how bills get sponsored and co-sponsored. But could you just give us a little bit from your perspective how a bill or how one of these bills would have been passed or co-sponsored by you?
Oh, yeah. So most bills actually start in the House of Representatives. And so it's one of us state representatives that would draft the bill, and then we put it out to our colleagues in the House for co-sponsors, where other state representatives can sign on as co-sponsors. And then once we have some co-sponsors on there, we release the bill, and then the bill ends up in one of the committees. So, for example, if it's an agriculture bill, it ends up in the agriculture committee. If it's an education bill, it goes there. If it's a health bill, it goes there, and there's many other committees. And then the bill needs to be brought up by the majority party. The committee chairman of the majority party would bring up the bill, and then it needs to pass in committee. It would get the first vote in committee, and if it passes in committee, and it would need to pass with a simple majority vote, then it goes to the House floor, and then it's up to the majority party leader to actually run the bill on the House floor. And it would have to pass there with 51% as well or more. And then it goes over to the Senate. It would go into Senate committee and then the Senate floor. And if it passes, it goes on to the governor for a final signature, which that makes it law.
Okay. Is there a normal time period, or if you've been in this for 10 years and you had all these bills that have been passed or co-sponsored, it's probably a long time.
Oh, yeah. Some bills go on for years. Others never get anywhere, even though they've been co-sponsored or sponsored a few sessions in a row. And a session, by the way, Chris, would be 2 years. So it coincides with our elected terms. So every 2 years, we kind of reorganize as House members. As I'm Republican, so reorganize as Republicans. The Democrats reorganize every 2 years because it's a 2-year term, and every 2 years we're all up for election. And So that's how that process works. But some bills, if leadership really wants it, a bill can be released, it can get a vote within weeks, it can come to the House floor, it can move through the Senate and on to the governor in just several weeks if they want to expedite one, but that's rare actually.
Okay. So there are certain circumstances for expediting and it can go a little bit faster. I guess was any of that during COVID was an example? Those bills were passed or?
Yeah, COVID would be a good example where we did expedite some things and, both parties kind of agreed to and so forth. But in general, it takes much longer, and do know that your special interest groups get involved in most pieces of legislation because it seems like it doesn't matter what it is anymore. There's somebody out there that's opposed to it. So we have to have all those debates. And some of these bills end up having hearings before we actually try and move them in a committee. That way we can hear opposing views, and it can be a good process, actually.
Yeah,
to get a bill going.
The back and forth. So the three sectors I think that you have had the most impact in, we will talk about the agricultural and rural affairs, supporting farmers, land preservation, farm labor, agricultural resources and innovation. And really, we're in East Earl, so we have a lot of neighbors that are in the agricultural business, and some of our team members either have come from the agricultural fields and have that work ethic behind them and knowledge, or they're doing both, where they're working for Brubacher during the day and maybe part-time agricultural or farmer at night. But really, where do you see the agricultural community going in this area for the next 10 or 20 years?
Yeah, great question, because every 10 years there's a census. And Pennsylvania, in the 2010 census, lost population. In the 2020 census, lost total population. But all the while the state's losing in total, Lancaster County is growing. So, for example, from 2010 to 2020, 10-year period, Lancaster County grew from 500,000 people to 550,000 people. We grew 50,000 people in just 10 years. And that becomes a bit concerning because it absolutely puts pressure on our agriculture community and the lands that our farmers are using, and, it drives prices and so forth. At the same time, while that's all happening, agriculture still is the largest industry in Lancaster County and in Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
So it's the largest industry and employs more people than any other sector. So it's huge. But things have changed. For example, Pennsylvania's largest ag sector was dairy for as long as I can remember. And just this past year, poultry actually surpassed dairy in Pennsylvania. So things have changed a bit. But right here in Lancaster County, with agriculture being so important, to me, when we're voting for, township supervisors, even borough councilmen, when we're looking at county commissioners and state representatives like myself, senators and beyond, individuals that have some understanding or a fair amount of understanding of agriculture, the significance of it, to me, is extremely important. And you mentioned the work ethic. There's something about some of these individuals that grew up down on the farm that just have that work ethic that's hard to find other places. So there's some value in that. And we're blessed here in Lancaster County to have that and have so many people with those kind of backgrounds as well. So for myself, Chris, I was in the agriculture industry where we were doing a lot of work in the genetic and reproductive side and doing a fair amount of research. And I could talk a long time about some of that. But while I was doing that, I was asked by family friends to serve as a township supervisor. And it was a time when a friend of my family, he was a supervisor, and one of the other supervisors passed away unexpectedly, and they needed to fill that role. Okay. So after some coaxing, I decided to try that, and I did. And then I served as a township supervisor for some time. But what that led to is they asked me then to be on the Agriculture Preservation Board, which I served on a number of years in Lancaster County. And, Lancaster County has over 100,000 acres preserved. And so I was happy to be part of preserving some of those farms. And think about it, Lancaster County still has some of the best soils in the world, non-irrigated. There's good soils in other parts of the world and other countries, but so much of it needs to be irrigated.
Okay.
Lancaster County does not. And so just preserving some of these really good farms and the good soils has some real value. And then as a township supervisor, I was also asked to serve on the County Planning Commission, which I did for some years, and just a great experience on how things work and function within county government. And then served on the Transportation Committee for a time as well. So gave me a lot of experience before I ended up becoming a state rep, and now we're dealing with things on the state level.
Yeah, that's a 10% growth from what you're saying is 500,000 to 550,000. That's 10%.
Yeah.
How do you balance the preservation of the land, but also that means we have to build more houses or infrastructure? So where do you see that balance at?
Yeah. Well, and that's a really good question. Number one, I think a preservation board needs to be looking at and spending a little more time on looking where the very best soils are and consider that for one. And also, if there's a way to start putting contiguous farms into this preservation where there's a region that the farms are preserved. You know, when you preserve a farm and then everything around it becomes developed.
Yeah.
That makes no sense long term.
Yeah.
You know, it just doesn't. The other thing is, I'm a huge advocate of actually going higher. In other words, for some of the buildings, some of the apartment buildings and so forth, why not another floor or two or three?
To go vertical.
Instead of just continuing to expand. And I know Lancaster County, we like, an acre tract and a big house, but the hard reality is, that doesn't work for everybody, and we should be considering more different housing type options and even building businesses. Is there some things we can do to actually help preserve land in the process?
Yeah, it's all the above. And then infrastructure, looks like you've been doing some research. You've been very busy. Roads and bridges, broadband is another thing. I mean, who would have thought 10 or 20 years ago that there would be that kind of infrastructure, and then public facilities to improve in the rural, including schools, healthcare facilities, community centers, enhancing the quality of life of our residents. And that's another thing. I mean, I've seen this shift as residents get older. The normal back in the day was a family member would take them in. Now there's more resources needed for that elderly care and keep moving our helping our system of residents.
Yeah, some really, really good questions there. And maybe we'll just start with the last one and come back to some of the others. But Pennsylvania is very friendly to seniors compared to some states. And that's okay. But that then requires that we kind of accommodate that. So what's going on is we've built some fabulous retirement communities, and some of those have had waiting lists and so forth. But there's quite a few people moving from other states and outside the area into these retirement homes. But for so many, they're also becoming unaffordable. And so I've become a huge advocate of age in place.
Okay.
And so there's a large lobbying group for doing more things to help people that want to stay at home, to give them, if they need a couple hours a day or a week, as they age, to come up with more plans for that kind of thing. And I'm a big advocate of, when we're building houses, why not wider halls? Why not wheelchair accessible showers? Why not from the garage going into the house instead of having to step up? What about being able to have wheelchair access to those kind of things? So I think those are the kind of things that need to be considered as we go into the future as well. And I spoke quite a bit about that, but huge believer in that maybe we need a better home care type system as people age and can maybe stay at home rather than all being in the retirement village. That's one thought. Comes to roads and bridges, I believe that government has some responsibilities, and if there's ever was one, it actually is infrastructure, because everybody uses roads and bridges.
Yes.
And I'll commend our county commissioners here in Lancaster County, Ray D'Agostino and Josh Parsons. They really went to work a few years ago to rebuild all the bridges that need to be rebuilt. Well, I was at a dedication of the last bridge that's county-owned just east of us here in Carnarvon Township, where they completely rebuilt or refurbished the last county-owned bridge. And they did that over like a 10-year period.
Wow.
And that's commendable for our county commissioners. When it comes to, roadways and keeping those all up, I'll be meeting with the constructors on Friday, actually, which do a lot of infrastructure work, roadway work here in Pennsylvania. And they advocate for package from out of Harrisburg on helping to accomplish that. So really working and reaching across the aisle on some of that. Representative Ed Nielsen from north of Philadelphia is the transportation chairman for the Democrats, and Kerry Benninghoff from State College areas, Center County, is the Republican chair for the Transportation Committee. And both of these individuals I've been working with on getting a whole new transportation bill put in place. So we have a meeting coming up this Friday on some of that. But to me, it's one of government's responsibilities. And Pennsylvania has a lot of roadway, has a lot of bridges, and I think, keeping that up and in good shape is a responsibility we actually have.
Yeah. The financial responsibility, and we touched a little bit about this, but you can't keep on overspending your income, right? And if you're going to put an addition or build a house, and you do get a mortgage or funding to do that, but it looks like from, especially the budget, there's a huge overspend to the amount of resources that are coming in. What is your thought on that fiscal responsibility?
Yeah. Well, just like a household, you don't budget for spending more than you plan to generate. And that's just a prudent approach by our families. And I think Lancaster County families do that as well as anybody anywhere. So on the state level, we had a $44 billion budget last year. And this year, the governor asked for $48 billion. So a $4 billion increase over last year. That's a huge increase. And then, as we process this budget through the House, which the way it works, Chris, and maybe some people don't understand this, but every year, second week of February, the governor addresses the House and Senate. The Senate members will come to the House chamber, and the House there says all the House members, all the Senate members are in the same room. The governor stands up and gives his budget address, as it's called, which is basically his wish list. And that was, again, a $48 billion ask. And then it's the House's responsibility to actually get to work, put together a budget. It's the House's responsibility, led by whomever party is in the majority. So, of course, this year it's the Democrats by one vote. The Democrats have 102 members. Republicans have 101 members. So we put together a budget, which spent a lot more than we should. And that went to the Senate, which is controlled by the Republicans. But in the end, the budget that was passed was a $47.7 billion budget. So only about $300 million less than the governor actually asked for. So a huge increase. And it actually is spending $3.3 billion more than we planned to generate. And again, that's not even considering if there's some kind of an economic downturn that would change our revenue sources as well.
So where does that revenue come from? Is it from in the reserves, or where does that extra money doesn't automatically appear out of thin air? Right. It's got to come from somewhere. So where were that?
Right. So we do have a rainy day fund. And it basically, what it's doing, it's going to gobble up the rainy day fund. What this leads to, if we don't have a rainy day fund and we spend that much more, and the problem is that so much of what we're spending up and above last year, so much of that is actually reoccurring. It's not where it's a one-time spend, it's reoccurring. So we'll have to come out with it next year again. And then I'm sure they'll want to add to that even. But if we keep going down this pathway, we are going to face, the taxpayers are going to face some major tax increases going forward, because that's the only way they're going to be able to even meet the current budgets.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that happens that some people maybe take some time to realize, when you build something, if it's a building, a pool, that's the cost to build it. But then there's a cost every year to maintain that. You need to put that in your calculation too, because once you build it, you got to maintain it, and there's a cost to maintenance every year. And sometimes I will say people don't think about that expenditure of
and that's
that.
reoccurring.
And that's every year they're going to have to do maintenance to that building or updates. And then I'm sure after 20 or 30 years, there's a bigger maintenance bill or a redo for a school or something like that. And so how do you navigate that? We know that you're fiscal responsible representative and you're an advocate for a balanced budget or whatever the budget is. But if we keep on doing these increases or wish lists, I would even think that if that is the governor's wish list, it could have been cut down even more. So how do you go about,
So I personally voted no on the budget. Now, the budget did pass, and I forget the actual yes votes and no votes. But in the House side, all Democrats voted for the budget, and a number of us Republicans voted against it. But we argued that it's a big spend and it's way too much, and there's got to be a way to trim that back. But in the end, as Republican senators were the ones that could actually make those changes, and they ended up presenting a $47.7 billion budget back to the House for reoccurring.
Yeah, and if you want to go online and find this, the details for the 2023-2024 House RCS number 148 budget, you can look at your representatives, how they voted, and if you agree or don't agree, or hopefully your vote will help that. But it looks like there was 173 yeses and 29 nays, and one was LVE.
So one's actually, and it is a Republican. So Joe Kerwin is in the Guard, and he's overseas and serving in the military, so he was not able to vote.
Yes.
Correct.
So, but majority, 173 yeses to that budget approval, and 29 nays was that. And Representative David Zimmerman was a no on that vote for the budget. So that is just amazing that the spend over that. So if we keep on going down that path, I mean, what does that look like for us? I mean, the rainy day fund is going to come dry if we keep on overspending, and fiscal responsibility is important. Like you said, no household can be ran with overspending every single month, either on the groceries, electric, car payments, insurance, all those things. So what does happen to the state if it can't balance a budget?
Well, and Chris, I'll just tell you this, that 10 years ago when I was first elected to the House of Representatives, we passed a budget that year for $28 billion. And so here we are 10 years later, and we just passed a budget that's just under $48 billion. So in 10 years, I don't even know what those percentages are. You can do the math, but $28 billion to $48 billion in 10 years.
Wow. But the amount of income, I guess, for the state has risen that much too. I mean, the state of Pennsylvania is a large economical portion of the whole federal income.
Oh, no question. Yeah, we're a large state. We have 13 million people, but also every time I push my red button no or my green button yes, I have to be thinking about what does this do to 13 million people? What is the impact on that? We are a large state, an important state, but keep in mind what makes it work is actually business.
Yeah.
And I keep telling people this over and over. It's like, with business, we have everything. Without it, we have nothing. Because business is what drives the economy. Business is what, moves the dollars. Business is who hires the people, who provides livelihoods for our families. And for me, as government, we should be empowering business to be business, do business, because that's what really drives our economy. And keep in mind, the reason that we've been able to increase the budget as much as we have in real recent times has to do with the influx of federal dollars. Our federal government, under the Biden administration, has injected billions of dollars into the economy. Well, what that's done, and many people don't understand this either, but by doing that, running the printing press, what you're doing is you're going to drive inflation. And look what's happened.
Yeah, we've seen that.
And people say, what happened? Well, it was all because we gave money away that we didn't have.
Yeah.
And that drives inflation. And that's the reason we are where we are. And we're going to have to quit that, because otherwise things are just going to be unaffordable. And you're just really suppressing the middle class and those that are poor. You're just suppressing that more.
Yeah. And we see it in this industry, to touch upon the construction industry. One of the driving factors, and we had some developers and engineers and some representation from your office to talk about this, because the outside community sees, price increases. My children are going to be coming to the age of potentially buying a house within a period of time. Are they going to be able to afford it? Because the regulations that are going, and again, I do believe we should have clean water, clean air, all the ability to buy property and prosper. So just that. But the amount of regulation, though, it puts a dampener on the opportunity sometimes, and it really hampers it. So how do you balance regulation, deregulation, or...
Yeah. Great question, because let me just give you two responses to that. The first one is that today we have pretty much two different types of elected officials. Those that are kind of in it for themselves and, looking for the next opportunity, and the other one that's really in it as a servant. And our founding fathers' vision was that those that are elected are here to serve. So here's how I see it. I don't consider myself government. I consider myself as having been elected by those that vote in 99th District. So now that I've been voted in office, it's my responsibility to represent and serve 65,000 people, no matter who they are, the 65,000 that live within the district. And so my responsibilities is to get answers from state government for the constituents, for the people that live here. And my staff, just blessed with wonderful staff that understands that real well. And so whenever somebody comes and has a question about state related, we do not take no for an answer from the state. We want to know, we want an answer so we can get it back to the constituents, because that's what it's about. It's about serving the people that live here. When it comes to regulations and the difference between a law and a regulation, you just say this, that a law generally starts in the House, goes to the Senate, the governor signs it into law. If we want to change that law, the only way to change it is to do the same process, House, Senate, governor, to change it. A regulation is done by our agencies. So whether it's agriculture, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's any of the other state agencies, whether it's PennDOT, whether it's, DEP, it's any of those state agencies, they can actually, and too many times, all they need is about 3 hearings across Pennsylvania and then come back to Harrisburg, and there's your regulation. Whether they make some changes based on what they heard in the hearing, or whether they just decide to ignore that, and here's your regulation. And those regulations are put in place by bureaucrats, people that have not been elected, people that have been appointed to these positions. And those individuals can make regulations many, many times faster than we can make law. The idea that our founding fathers had was that the process of making laws is slow and methodical. And now we've put all these agencies in place over many, many years. And these individuals sit in there and they're within an agency and they're probably like-minded. And then they say, well, we ought to regulate this. And they do these hearings and it comes back to Harrisburg. Here's the regulations. So they can make regulations hand over fist. And I've done a number of bills, actually, that are really a bill that would push back on regulations. And so it's become very complex and way too easy for our agencies to overregulate. And overregulation, what that does, it just drives the costs, because in the end, taxpayers pay. I mean, business owners have to pass it along. And so we have really have overregulated in so many entities, whether it's in the health side, whether it's the environmental side, whether it's, you name it. We've overregulated in every area.
Yeah.
And we have to get back to more basics and more common sense when it comes to regulating. And as you had indicated, we all believe in having, clean water and clean air and so forth. And there's some common sense things we can do, but we've overregulated that as well, without doubt.
Yeah. So speaking of our founding fathers, do you have a favorite founding father? Or, a lot of people probably just say John Hancock because he wrote his name the largest. But what I found that was interesting was a lot of the founding fathers who signed the Declaration of Independence were in their mid-20s, very young. But the wisdom that they had it's really, I commend them because they couldn't see the technology that was coming, but they had the common sense to write some of those laws.
I commend our founding fathers for especially a couple of things. And that is for the Constitution that they put together and for these three branches of government. Because when the three branches stay in their lanes, there's no other country in the world that has that in place and that works as well as it does here in this country.
Yeah.
But when our judicial system, who is in place to interpret law, or our legislators are in place to make law, and where the administration's in place to carry it out, when they stay in their lanes and do their jobs, there's just nothing better than that. So that's a really good thing that the founders put in place. When it comes to who do I really appreciate, there's a number of them, but I will say that somebody like John Adams and John Quincy Adams are just, to me, were just brilliant. The person that I actually give tours at the Capitol all about is William Penn. Now, he came to America back in 1682, so, well before we were even a nation. But some of what was put together, it was William Penn that was our first governor. It was Ben Franklin, for example, was House Speaker in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, outside the Mayflower Compact, for example, which was a more communal government, Pennsylvania was really our first government in this country.
Yeah.
And it became the model for the U.S. government. So the William Penn ideas on governing, and keep in mind, in the 1500s, 1600s, for 150 years or more, there was big battles on people leaving the state church and battles between everybody. And that's why many of our ancestors ended up in America by the invitation of William Penn, who said he wants Pennsylvania to be the model for religious freedom for not only the New World to see, but for the world over, where people can actually come here, not disagree actually, not attend the same church and the likes, but get along. And, what a concept. Many of our ancestors, including mine, are here for that because they were invited by Penn.
Oh, that's amazing. So one of the things I touch upon, and we share common religious beliefs. Mm-hmm. How does that play into government? And if you could touch upon that, it's inspiring for me because I know your religious beliefs and you do talk about it. So thank you for that and being out there. I know it's probably not the easiest thing and probably makes you maybe a target for some other opposition, but if you could touch upon that, I appreciate it.
Yeah. The thing is that I believe that the Lord was with our founding fathers. I really do. And like you mentioned, some of them were actually quite young, but what they were able to put in place. But look at the story behind every one of our founders, everyone that signed. Look at their stories. And they were really persecuted, and there was a lot of issues happened to every single one of them because of it. But because of them, and I believe the Lord was with them, we have a nation that we have for 248 years. And I believe that the Lord is very much in the midst of what's happening in government. But I keep saying what we're really in, within government, it's actually spiritual warfare. We have these two sides that are just, going after each other like we've never seen. And it's become worse even since I'm in Harrisburg than it's been. But the one thing that's so encouraging to me is that one of the senators and myself were able to acquire a room in the Capitol for a group that wanted to come and pray for legislators. So every Monday morning from 10:30 to 11:30. There's a group that are meeting and praying for the week for all of us legislators, and spend that hour, and there can be anywhere from 30 to over 70 individuals, and they're traveling for miles, some of them giving up a big part of a day to do that, but they see that as very important. And you know what, that to me it's a huge encouragement actually that they're actually willing to do that, because they are so interested in preserving what our founders put together for us. And so I trust the Lord, and I ask him every day to be with decisions, and I pray that every vote that I make is the right vote, because I'm going to affect 13 million people every time I push a button. So it's very important, and it's not about me. It's about us, all of us in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So extremely important. So.
Well, we appreciate that, and I'll keep you in our prayers that God gives you wisdom. I think that's the most important thing that a representation can have is wisdom. There's probably so many topics, and we can keep on going on forever, but we just at Brubacher want to say thank you for your representation. We consider ourselves to be honored and privileged to be constituents of yours, and we do appreciate everything you do. And thank you so much for everything you do.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Chris.
And if there's
appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you, and it's just so good to, have a conversation with people that are kind of on the same page on, what's happening politically and where we are spiritually as well. So thank you, Chris.
Yes, and this year you will be running again for your seat, so we don't have to worry about you not running. You're not looking to retire, so we appreciate it as well. Is there anything that we can do for you? Do you have a campaign, or if someone's listening to this and agrees with what we're talking about here, how can we help you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and like I had mentioned earlier, we just had a fundraiser and just blessed by the business community that came together and helped with that. But the thing that we're going to need more help going forward is actually when there's good legislation introduced, the business community needs to get behind some of that legislation and start talking and making calls and emailing our colleagues to get this moving, and the chairman of these committees and so forth. And let me just give you one. It's not my bill. It's Dawn Kiefer's bill, which is a state rep, one of my colleagues from out of Northern York County. And this is a bill known as the REIGN Act, REIGN, REIGN Act. And the REIGN Act, what that does, it says that if a new regulation that our agencies are putting in place spends $1 million or more, it has to come back after they want to put this regulation in place. It has to come to the House and the Senate and the governor in order to be implemented. That would stop maybe 90% of the regulations that are new and being implemented. That kind of thing would be a game changer for government. So just share that. And so what I want to see is our business community and way beyond churches and so forth getting more involved in contacting those, and we can give you the contact information, all those that could help get a bill like that forwarded into law.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah,
so that's one example, and I could give you many.
Yes, yeah. But I guess the main point is, and you have a newsletter that comes out.
Yeah, I do a weekly email, actually, that comes out. Yeah, plus a newsletter occasionally. So
there's plenty of ways to get connected.
Oh, yeah.
The website. But again, thank you so much for everything that you do. We appreciate it. I appreciate your time. And if you ever want to come back to the Brubacher and Beyond podcast, please let us know.
Sure.
We will do another episode.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Brubacher podcast today. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our podcast so you can listen to the new episodes each month. Share it with your friends in the industry and those who might like to learn more about the construction industry. Feel free to check out our website at www.brubacher.net. I'm Keith Brubacher, president of Brubacher Excavating Incorporated, and we hope you found our discussion insightful, and we look forward to the next time together.